Welcome to the Weights and Plates podcast. I am Robert Santana. I am your host, along with Trent Jones, my co-host.
Hey, what's going on, man?
Not much, man. Just hanging out. I got a birthday tomorrow.
Oh, no way.
Yeah, another trip around the sun.
Are you 40 yet?
No, 39. I'm not fucking 40. Like Kid Rock song.
I knew you weren't. I just had to rib you a little bit there. But next year,
I will be.
You're going to be a masters athlete.
I think I am in weightlifting.
Oh yeah, really? It's normally 40 in like anything like powerlifting and strength lifting, right? Isn't 40 usually the cutoff?
Yeah, well, weightlifters, they jump and land, so, they get old man joints earlier.
That's true. Yeah, that's true. It's kind of like the NFL, right? Like if you were, how many 30-year-old running backs do you see in the NFL?
Yeah, I don't know.
Not a whole lot.
Not a whole lot.
You're pretty washed up by then, generally.
Yeah.
Well, what the hell are we going to talk about today? I actually have no idea.
Yeah, I think we have a topic that will work for this episode. We're going to talk about bulking. Bulking, bro.
Dude, I'm on that perma bulk. I just bulk, and then I think about cutting, and then I just keep bulking. I just bulk some more.
That's right. That's the only way to do it.
I just cultivate mass.
Just like the weight on the bar can only go up, the weight on the scale can only go up.
Yeah, I was reading about this guy. I had not heard of him before, but Pat Casey.
Okay.
Powerlifter. There's a few Pat Caseys out there. I should clarify. This is the powerlifting Pat Casey.
Is he in the Blue Book? Did Rip mention him?
He might be. It's been a little while since I've read the Blue Book. I'm probably due for a reread. It's been a few years for me. But yeah, Pat Casey, there's a nice article about him written by the one and only Marty Gallagher. He's like he's basically like the historian of strength. But yeah, he was a early powerlifter. So he was doing it back in the mid 60s when the sport was brand new. And I believe he was the first man to bench 600 pounds in 1965.
I think that's where it was probably in the bench press chapter.
Okay, yeah. So basically, as Marty Gallagher was talking about his training routine and, this was all, you got to remember, this is the early days of the sport. So all the sort of, linear progression stuff that we take for granted, I think guys kind of knew, but it wasn't widely distributed. And a lot of guys were just sort of on their own trying to figure this stuff out. And, they kind of had to reinvent the wheel. So he was doing some sort of progression, but it's kind of wacky. He was doing like a lot of like really heavy, like lockout work, which is not a bad idea, really. And he would drop down, do a lot of volume, full range of motion. But the thing that caught my eye was he was 6'1", which is pretty tall for a powerlifter, especially a 600-pound bencher. And he continually pushed his body weight up during his competitive career from about 260, where apparently that's when he hit the 500-pound bench press mark, is at a body weight of 260. And he pushed his body weight up over the years to 320. And that's when he benched 622.
Whoa.
Also squatted 800 raw. So, to do this, he would eat, 3 or 4 solid meals. And on top of that, several quarts of milk a day mixed with protein powder.
Yeah, that's how it's done.
And it's really simple, right? The reason I've been thinking about this lately is I run into a lot of guys who are just getting into strength training and they want to change their body. They want to get, they don't quite know it yet, but they want to get bigger. And I usually have to have the conversation about skinny fat and being under-muscled, which we've talked about ad nauseum on this show. But I think there's this breakdown where they don't really understand what it's going to take to gain muscle and to get bigger. And if you want to do it, you're going to have to do what Pat Casey did, right? Now, you may not be going from 260 to 320. I'm not saying you need to put on 60 pounds from an already pretty stacked frame.
No,
but if you need to put on 25 pounds, which a lot of guys do, you're going to have to eat some damn food.
Just watch out. these research enthusiasts are going to turn around and tell you you can't gain 25 pounds of lean mass in a year. So you need to be, precise with your words for these people.
Okay. Oh, yeah. No, I didn't say lean mass, did I?
Yeah. You said muscular body weight.
I said muscular body weight, and I didn't say in a year either.
Yeah.
Yeah. What I consider muscular body weight, that's not a technical term, right? Maybe I should make it one. TM.
Yeah. TM.
When I think of muscular body weight, I think of a male, because I think this is different for females, right? So we have to specify here. This is for a male. It's gaining body weight, which is probably going to be somewhere in the order of 60 to 80% muscle.
Yep.
And that's going to be governed by your age and your genetics and your testosterone level.
Yeah.
And this is assuming that you're training hard. You're lifting heavy weights. You're driving your barbell lifts up. But yeah, I like that example of Pat Casey, because here's a young jacked guy who got up to a pretty damn big size. I think most guys around would see 6'1", 260 and be like, damn, that guy's big. And he was. But to truly get stronger and to take his strength from like pretty damn good to best in the world, the guy had to add 60 more pounds to his frame. Okay?
Well, keep in mind that he was probably 25% body fat.
Yeah, there's some really cool pictures of the guy. There's one of them with him standing in front of a bench with a whole bunch of plates loaded up. And I'd say the guy was probably somewhere between 20 and 25% body fat, just kind of eyeballing it.
Yeah, and that's necessary for the sport that he was in. So, there's a lot to unpack there, because, a lot of our audience, we get people that are listening to that and they're like, well, I don't want to be a big fat guy benching 600.
I just turned off everybody in the...
Yeah. And, don't change the channel yet, because, we're going to bring this back to earth here in a second.
Yeah.
Number one, you're not going to be a big fat guy that benches 600. Most of you won't. You'll probably be a big fat guy, benching 300.
Right.
That might happen for a lot of you.
Right. Yeah.
And it may not be worth it to get that fat. It just depends on the person. But my point is, for him to have benched over 600, what did you say, 620, 640?
Yeah, 622 is what it says in the article.
Yeah, for that guy to do that, he already had to have a decent genetic makeup that favors heavy bench pressing, and he was probably taking stuff too. Let's be real,
Yeah,
not that diminishes. Yeah. Not that diminishes anything. By the way, I think that if you haven't listened to it already, everybody needs to go on Starting Strength Radio and listen to Rip's episode on steroids from last week. That would have been when today is the. What's today? The 20th? So that would have been the 13th? Yeah, the 13th. Okay. No, yeah. the 14th. So July 14th. You need to go listen to that, because he kind of hammers this to hell. And he has a lot more experience with this than I do. But at the end of the day, if you're in a sport and you're performing at the top 1%, then the steroids aren't going to contribute that much to your performance. They're just not. You're going to do things that you can't do without them. Abso-fucking-lutely,
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
But the guys that are performing at the top 1% of any sport aren't doing that because of steroids. Steroids may give you the absolute raw result,
Right.
In the case of baseball with Barry Bonds, number of home runs, right? But I bet that number still would have been pretty fucking high without them.
Oh, yeah. He was already a power hitter before he got huge.
Yeah, the foundation was there, and that's the same thing in lifting. I knew a guy once, this is just end of one data point, he was on a bunch of shit. He was, top 10 in powerlifting at the time for his weight class, or, whatever the hell he was doing. But when I met him, he was pulling 740, and, he was, on gear, as they call it. He was on steroids. And they were all having a conversation one day about, these people that don't take drugs, hating on people that take drugs. And then he brings up that, hey, I pulled 660 before I ever got on anything, So
yeah.
I did the math on that. What is that, a 12% improvement from taking steroids,
Right.
It's not like the guy was a 300-pound deadlifter and went to being close to an 800-pound deadlifter just by taking a bunch of drugs. It doesn't necessarily work that way. Now, the caveat I always like to give is when people take steroids, they get an appearance that cannot be achieved without it. That part is true.
Right.
Your muscles are going to be more dense because they're carrying more water. You're going to have more vascularity. There are certain physical signs that are there are going to be physical signs that you're on steroids. There are, and some people like that look. I have a friend that said steroids on a guy are like fake tits on a girl,
Right. Yeah.
And, he's like, people can tell. And I've asked a few females who are like, that's a pretty good analogy,
Yeah. Yeah.
Some people like it and they know it's fake and they like it and they're fine with it, and then some people just don't like it, But the point is, when you get on drugs, because I know that we have a lot of, people that care about their physique listening to us, when you get on drugs, it's going to do things to your physical appearance that cannot be done with training, But I digress. We're talking about performance here. And on the topic of performance, you're not going to be in the top 1% simply by taking steroids. It doesn't work that way.
Yeah,
These guys. No. There's in traditional sports, there's no technique steroids. Steroids don't improve your technique. So like you said, if Bonds was a power hitter, he was a very gifted baseball player as it is, So he was going to perform at a much higher level than most people, hands down. And then you give him steroids, now he's going to do things that nobody else can do, right? And guess what? At the time he was playing, everybody was on fucking steroids. So why was he the only one hitting 75 home runs? Was it?
Yeah. What is 73? Yeah, I can't remember, but
73, something like that. It was the steroid era, as they call it.
Yeah,
so
the best
everybody
era
was
of baseball.
Yeah, everybody was on steroids.
Yeah.
So you got to understand that, with that shit, it enhances what's already there. So if you're a mediocre athlete, you'll probably be less mediocre on steroids. If you're an elite top 1% athlete, you're going to be even more elite,
Yeah.
And it becomes, it's part of this. First of all, sports are not healthy, people, Professional athletes are not healthy. Their bones or joints or connective tissues are shot to shit. In contact sports, they have brain damage, That is not fucking healthy. Maybe their heart and lungs are pretty healthy from all the conditioning they have to do, but their body's beat to fucking shit,
Yeah.
Yeah. So, if anything, I'm with Rip. He made a comment saying the steroids probably reduce, the number of injuries these guys get compared to playing, these intense sports without it. It allows them to do things they cannot do without it. That training is very demanding. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely.
The sport is very demanding. But this is not, it's not what this episode's about. But it's an important part of the equation because, the guy you're talking about, Casey, he was, 300 plus pounds, benching 600. He grew, he gained probably over 100 pounds through the course of his training career. We don't know where his baseline was, but we know that he gained 60 pounds to get from 500 to 600 or 600 plus, right?
Right. Yeah.
But that, that's not that you got to factor in that. I don't have a picture of him in front of me, but I'm guessing he had short arms, big muscle bellies on his biceps and triceps, probably.
Big elbow joints.
Yeah, big elbow joints,
huge,
and big pecs.
Giant pecs.
And let's put any drug accusations aside. He probably had those things before he got on drugs.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, you just remember this mid-60s, and I don't know anything about the guy, right? I just read a couple articles about him, but this is mid-60s. I can imagine powerlifting it was brand new. It was not
brand new.
This is not a premier world sport or anything like that. So, I don't know that guy didn't bench 500 natural and then maybe started taking some stuff late in his career to push himself to the next level, right? It very well could
Probably. There's a few things that happen. You gain 60 pounds, you do acquire more leverage to lift more weight. Are you going to, do what is it? What is it? 100? It's like a 30% improvement. Are you going to get a 30% improvement in your bench press from gaining 60 pounds when your bench press is already 500? I don't know. Maybe. Yeah. Maybe not, but
I'm not.
I'm sure as hell I'm not.
Right.
I think what am I, 180-ish? I'm 177. So let's just round it up for easy math. Mm-hmm. My bench my best bench probably right now, it's probably like 290 at this weight. You know, when I've hit over 300, I was 190 pounds. Here, that's some percentages, right? So for
Yep.
me gaining 15 or so pounds, 15, no, more like 20 pounds. Let's say I gained 20 pounds. My bench went up 20 pounds. So what's 20 out of 290? It's not even 10%, you know?
Right. Yeah.
And I mean, I only did that for like, what, a year or two? I was that heavy. So, you know, it's not enough data for me to say what I can and can't do. I think if I gained 100 pounds, I'd see a pretty drastic improvement in my bench because I wouldn't be going down as far, have more leverage, right?
Absolutely.
But to go from 500 to 600, you know, you have to be a certain type of individual physically.
Yeah.
And you probably need chemical assistance to do that. And all that's fine. And I'm only explaining this to add context to it because there are guys that have followed the linear progression and they ate 6,000 calories and they show up here and like, I got so fat, what the fuck, you know? And it's like, well, you have shitty muscle building genetics, bro, you know? What do you want me to tell you? And your diet was absolute garbage. Most of these people don't eat right. You know,
Right.
they end
So
up in this situation.
that's what I want to get to today, right? So
Yeah.
the first of all is just like what I'm trying to describe here, and you know, I'm not trying to say that y'all all need to be Pat Casey. You don't need to gain 60 pounds of body weight. That's not what I'm saying here. But we've talked to you before about how if you're under muscled, you're going to have to put on muscle. And I think there's some word magic that goes on here. Like when we try to be careful with our words around this, right? It's not just gaining weight, right? We want to put on muscle. Like, because we don't want you to just get fat. That serves no purpose, right? We want you to put on muscular body weight. But
you're going to get fat by your standards.
Right, but you're going to put on some body fat, right? But the reason, I think the thing is, though, when we say muscular body weight, I think a lot of people that are new to lifting, in their head, they're like, oh, it's going to be 100% lean mass. I'm going to look freaking ripped. And it's like, no, it's not going to happen. And I think the other thing is, like, I think people, they don't associate that with eating a large amount of calories. That's the other piece of this. And that's what I wanted to talk about today, right? Which is, I think people are like, oh, okay, so I need to gain some weight. Okay, and it's going to be all like muscular body weight. It's going to be awesome. I need to gain 5 to 10 pounds. And we're like, no, if you're 6 foot 170, I see that a lot nowadays. Everybody's like 6 feet tall and like 170, maybe 180. And it's like, no. You need to weigh like 205 to 225. That's what a muscular frame is going to look like on you. I'm not even talking big. I'm just saying like a muscular looking dude. So you need to gain you need to gain 30 to 40 pounds, let's say.
Mm-hmm.
And so that means that your caloric intake is going to be significantly higher than what you're eating now.
And you're going to gain body fat, and you're going to think you're fat. If you're a skinny fat guy, you're going to think you're fat. Sorry, I'm just telling you how it is.
Yep.
And that's part of the equation, you know. We're going to get Mike Minningill on here at some point to talk about this because this guy has a pretty good story. So he did linear progression. He's 6'1", I think.
Okay.
6 foot 6'1", and he was sub 200, I think, when he went over to Horn Strength back in the day. It was probably 8 years ago or so. And he pushed his body weight up to 240, you know, at 6'1", 6'2".
Okay, yeah.
And, you know, he put on body. And I want to put a caveat here. Mike, I would say he's one of these ectomesomorph types. You know, he tends to stay lean for the most part, you know, has a tight skin, decent bodybuilder genetics, you know. But, you know, he's tall, so bodybuilders are short. But, he's just he's one of these like ectomesomorph guys, small frame, but has nice muscle bellies that, you know, kind of protrude out. Anyhow, he put the fat on, you know, he pushed his body weight up to 240. You know, he lost his abs and his neck got really fucking big and he got sleep apnea, you know. And, you know, we're not suggesting doing this. He would not. Well, we'll let him decide what he suggests because we've talked about this. It's a temporary situation is what I think he would say because that's what him and I have talked about. And we talk about this a lot because we both went through this. You know, we pushed our weight up. He went up to 240. I went up to 205. Remember, I'm 5'9", so he's got 3 to 4 inches on me.
Yeah.
So if you scale that, it's comparable weight gain, right? And, at the time I hated it because I was a skinny fat guy. And I'm like, oh, I'm lifting all this weight. And it's not even that much because I'm in a powerlifting gym and there's guys, doing sets of 5 with my max, So I'm like, I'm not even lifting that much and I'm chubby and this and that. And I can't see any definition. I have to be so skinny to see all that bullshit. All the shit that I know you guys have thought of, right?
Yeah, right.
And, I just wrote it out. I tuned it out. I'm like, well, this is just emotional shit. Just sideline that and keep training, and there'll be a time to lose the fat, right? So, I lost the body fat later. And pretty much each time I, tried to build, I guess, I didn't have to gain as much weight to get stronger,
Right.
Like,
yes. Yeah.
and he said the same thing. He trains at around 200 pounds now. It's really hard for him to get stronger because he squats over 600. Or no, he squats almost 600, like 590 or something. And he deadlifts over 600. So,
Yeah,
we're looking at a
that's-
guy who can triple body weight squat and deadlift,
Yeah. That's pretty impressive.
And I'm getting close to that myself if I could just recover here. But, what I will tell you is in the first 5 years that I trained like this. Now, I'd bulked before where I gained a bunch of body weight, lifted, and then lost it. And I did stupid things in the weight room. But I always try to add weight to the bar, especially on my big lifts. So I did get something out of that, but then I would cut wrong and I'd do a bunch of cardio reps and just basically ensure that I lose a lot of that muscle, So, I'd done it like 2 or 3 times in my 20s. And then in my late 20s, I found starting strength, pushed up to 192 on my linear progression, drank the gallon of milk. Then came down to 168 and then went up to 205 as an early intermediate and then dropped down to 163, I think was the lowest I saw. I saw 162, 161, but that was just like me taking a piss or something. But yeah, I went from 205 down to 162. I lost about 5% of my strength doing that. Then I went back up to, for over a 5-year period, I slowly coasted up to 193 most of the time. Then, I saw that 195, 197 a couple times, but basically the low to mid 190s. And then I went back down to 168. I didn't have to go lower than that. I was pretty ripped at 168. And then now I'm about 178. And what I've noticed again is that my bottom is getting higher. So like my bottom limit to where I start looking really lean is going up. I'm closer to 170 versus 160 in the past.
Right.
And when I quote unquote bulk, I don't have to quite get to 200 anymore. Although that might change this time because, again, I'm starting from a higher bottom, But the point is, when I was a novice and early intermediate, it made a huge difference to gain all that weight. Nowadays, I don't know that it makes a difference. However, a good argument has been made by my fellow starting strength coach, Carl Ragavan, that I may not have gotten fat enough to really see the benefits. And I want to talk about that as well. There's a couple reasons that we lift more weight when we gain weight. Obviously, you're eating more calories. So you're in an anabolic environment. You're releasing more insulin. Your testosterone is probably higher up to a point, that it's a U-shaped curve there. At some point, it can get low from being too fat,
Right.
But you're in an anabolic environment, so there's that. But 2, your leverage is changing. It's easier to squat when you're chubby.
Absolutely.
I got a guy who's 6'3" right now. He's 220. For him, that's heavy. He started at 130, 140,
Yeah.
So he's
that's
total
awesome.
ectomorph. But he has a belly, and he understands. And his squat cleaned up immediately once he got a belly. And I'm not saying go get a belly, because the thing is when you lose it, it's easier to learn how to squat skinny once you've done it fat for a little bit.
Yes.
And I've learned that myself,
Yeah.
Because you just you get better spatial awareness, Now, some people shouldn't do this. If you have metabolic disease, probably not great to, shoot your blood sugar up when you have diabetes to get fat, like there's special circumstances where I wouldn't recommend this. But to kind of go back to Rip's point that you gain fat now or you gain weight now, lose the fat later, that's generally true. Different coaches have different ideas of what that looks like. And then you also got to individualize it to the lifter. And this is where you skinny fat guys need to pay attention because I'm talking to you. I understand you don't want to bench 500 or squat 600 or deadlift 800. That's not what we're trying to do here. And that's fine. So you also probably don't need to gain that much weight then, but you're going to go through a period where you're not that defined. It's that in-between stage where, when you grow your hair out, if you ever grown your hair out from a buzz cut, there's that first period where it grows really fast and it goes from like, almost nothing to, you've got some hair now, but then it gets to that place where it's not long and it's not short and you just want to cut it so fucking bad. Well, your body does that when you're trying to build muscle.
Yeah.
You get to a point where you're not defined, you're not ripped, but you're not, super fat either. You look like you train in clothes, but then when you take your shirt off, there's not really much definition going on. You just got the shape, I should say.
Yeah.
And you have to be able to endure that because usually that's where you got the best leverage to train. And before you go on and say, well, that's leverage, that's not building muscle, it all works together, people. It's all part of the equation.
Right.
And there's a lot of unanswered shit here. There's a lot of things we don't understand. Every single person, including that bodybuilder that told you don't have to get fat, including him, you know who I'm talking about. Nobody specific, but they all say it, right? All the bodybuilding gurus say the same shit. They're like, oh, you don't have to get fat. All those guys have gotten fat when they bulk. Look at the champions. Look at
right.
Ronnie Coleman. Look at Lee Priest.
Yeah, I was about to say Lee Priest. There's like pictures of him like peak bulk where he's like downing like 6 Big Macs and the dude's just a mountain of.
and these guys are on a bunch of steroids too.
Yeah,
and they still get fat.
Right.
And when I say get fat, I mean they lose their muscle definition and put on a little bit of a belly. They do it even with all the drugs. So there is something about that allows you to make progress in the long term. I don't know what that is. I don't know what that is, but
right.
The research people are going to sit there and say that it makes no difference. You'll gain the same lean mass either way. Well, first of all, there's no way to really measure lean mass. The DEXA does not directly measure lean mass. The underwater weighing does not directly measure lean mass.
Right.
And I don't think any of these instruments are very good for tracking long-term trends. I think that, direct measurements like waist circumference, thigh circumference, skin fold thickness, those things, percent body fat aside, just those measurements, those direct measurements, not the algorithms that you plug them into. I'm talking about the direct measurements. I think those are going to tell you more than a body fat test. I think this percentage body fat is largely bullshit,
Yeah.
Especially when you're in the middle. When you're on the extremes, a guy who's like 40% body fat probably looks like he's 40% body fat. A guy who's like 5% body fat probably looks like he's 5% body fat. But I noticed that everything in between, it could be all over the fucking place.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, sure.
So, I think those direct measurements are going to give you a pretty good indication of what the hell your body's doing. But my point is that every single one of these guys, with few exceptions, like Franco Columbu, he was one of those mesomorph guys that just did not gain body fat when he was building muscle,
Right.
Frank Zane was an ectomesomorph, another guy that would just, get more jacked, when he gained weight. But most of these guys, they would, as they would say, they called it smoothing out. They'd smooth out, they'd put on a belly, then they'd fucking cut. I mean, they would do a more extreme version of what we're talking about. They'd cut hard, take more drugs, and get ready to get on stage. That's how bodybuilding worked back then, and I think that's still how it works today. I'm oversimplifying, of course, but the problem is they turn around, go on Instagram, post a picture of them, contest ready, or maybe like few months out, where they'll post pictures up where they're lean and vascular, and then tell you don't have to gain that much fat. And it's like, really? Well, why the fuck did you do it?
Right.
And maybe if they're not later in their career, it's because they're so advanced, it's not going to really do much for them at that point. They kind of, you become more efficient under the bar, or, they're using machines and other shit too, but you become more efficient lifting weights. It doesn't help you as much the longer you're in the game, and you kind of settle into your weights, just like in a weight class sport, right? Eventually you settle into a weight class and you compete at that weight class. It's the same kind of thing. But my point is, you're going to have to grow, and you're going to be beach ready if you're really trying to do this. There's going to be periods of time where you're not going to, be super defined. But if you stick with it long enough, and by long enough, I don't mean 12 weeks, academic semester, little research program, training program from a research study. I'm talking 2 to 5 years. You know?
Yeah, it's years. It's years.
Yeah, it's years, and you're gonna gain weight, you're gonna lose weight, in that time. You're gonna get stronger. But if you get past the first 3 to 5 years, you're gonna see the fruits of your labor, and you're not gonna. Most of you probably aren't gonna gain 30 or 40 pounds of lean mass, but you're gonna visually look more like the way you want to look if you manage to pull that off.
Right. Yep. Absolutely. Yeah, and it's to your earlier point. It's abundantly clear to me that I can still press. Let's see, I've got to do an intensity press tomorrow, and I'll be going for. I got to double check my logbook, but I believe it's 185 for a top set of 5.
Okay.
And as my body weight right now is 180, roughly. I'm actually lower than I thought. We had this discussion the other day. I hopped on a scale at a Globo gym when I was traveling recently, and I just kind of assumed I was like 185, maybe trending up a little bit because I've been trying to eat more, and then I stepped on the scale, it was like 179. Like, oh fuck.
Damn.
Yeah, but it explains a lot, right? Explains why my squat and bench have fallen so much from my peak. But yeah, it's abundantly clear to me that the fact that I can do, I'm pressing at body weight, and I'll now be above body weight for a set of 5. I can only do that because I pressed, 205 for 3 sets of 5 when I weighed 205. There's some sort of central nervous system adaptation, and probably some muscular like remodeling that happened in that process, that when I drop 25 pounds of body weight, I can still press at body weight.
That's right.
So yeah, there's definitely something to it, even if we don't have a good explanation for it. But yeah, so what I see when I'm interacting with guys, and it's generally the person that's starting, that's new to strength training, either brand new or somebody who's been in it maybe for a few months, let's say like 6 to 12 months, and they've been trying, and they haven't really, they don't have a good idea, they don't have a good vision of what a muscular body transformation is going to look like, right?
Right.
I see a lot of guys who are 6 feet tall, like I said, and a lot of them are somewhere around 170 pounds, plus or minus 10 pounds. Every once in a while you find a guy who's skinnier, who's like a 140, 150 at that body weight. It's very skinny. But I'd say the average guy is 6 foot, 170 pounds. The guys who are a little bit shorter than that, I see a lot of like 5'8" to 5'10" guys who are 150 to 165.
Yeah.
The real tall guys, I see less of them because they're a smaller percent of the population. But the guys who are like 6'4" and above, I see a lot of guys that are tall and they're like 200 pounds, 6'4", 200, let's say.
Yeah.
So that's a baseline of a lot of guys that I'm seeing. And I would say the average age of these people that I'm talking about is, between 20 and 50 to put so they're not old, but they're not necessarily like young teenagers either, right? That are still going through puberty.
Right.
These are adult males. So, I mean, the way that I think about it, just in rough numbers, because everyone's going to be different, right? Is that 6 foot guy who weighs 170 pounds, he's probably going to have to be somewhere between 200 and 225 to hit a physique that is big and muscular and also achieve some strong lifts. In other words, to get enough leverage to really drive their numbers up to be as strong as they can be, right?
Absolutely.
Obviously, framed matters a lot there. Your skinny ectomorph guys are going to be 200, and that's going to be a hard, it's take a while to get there. Your bigger framed guys, you got, bigger skeleton, bigger bones, bigger joints, all that kind of stuff. They're going to be 225 at that same body weight. Same thing for the 5'8" to 5'10" guys. They're going to be between 185 and 200. Mm-hmm. Okay, your 6'4" guy needs to weigh 245 probably, maybe 250. And that's not, none of these are, that might sound outrageous. It usually does. I think, if I go right out and say like, hey, you need to weigh 225, they just look at me like, you're crazy, man. That's freaking huge. It's not. Right? Remember, Pat Casey was too small at 6'1", 260. Okay, he was a champion powerlifter. We're not talking about that. We're just talking about an average guy that wants to get big and muscular and look big, and actually achieve some strong lifts. So that's kind of my just ballpark of like what you should be looking at. So what is that? In each of those cases, that's roughly 30 to 40 pounds of body weight, of total body weight.
Yep. That's
Does that sound about right to you?
Yeah, that's right. That sounds about right. And what I was going to say is it's a temporary situation. You don't have to stay there, but you have to stay there for a bit.
Yeah.
You don't have to stay there for a bit.
But that's
And
that's what we're looking at, and so I wanted to bring that forward now to the next part of it, which is how do you get there? Because, like you said, there's a lot of guys out there in the fitness world who are saying like, "Oh man, you shouldn't be if you're eating a bunch of food and getting fat. It's like, what about your health, man? Like, you shouldn't do that. You don't have to get fat." Well, and we're telling you like, no, you're going to have to put on this body weight. But then I think there's another breakdown, which is like, how do you put on this body weight? What does that process look like?
Like, what the fuck does it even mean to get fat, first of all? Like,
Right.
We're not telling you to get morbidly obese, because guess what? If you get too fat, you can't get into the positions we need you to get into. So that's number one.
Right.
But number two, quote unquote, getting fat by today's standards due to, as we've said many times, the Fight Club era that seems to not die, has convinced many, many boys and men that anything over 10% body fat is fat. And I think that number's probably gone up to 12 now. Maybe 15's more acceptable because their girlfriends got mad that they were more leaner than them. I remember hearing that 6 years ago from a guy, and then my own girlfriend told me that. So I think 15 has become more acceptable. But universally, people think 20% body fat is fat, and there are no quote unquote standards for fat percentage. First of all, because the data that we have on it is such garbage, and old and dated, and the samples are small and the instruments are different. So we don't really even know if 20% body fat is fat. But basically, any sort of abdominal protrusion is considered fat, whether it's a 50-inch waist or a 35-inch waist. And I think it's quite ridiculous, because if you look throughout history, just go look at athletic pictures from the early 20th century. A lot of the guys were either skinny or, just undefined. Not everybody had visible abs. It was not the norm. It never was the norm.
Right.
And suddenly now it's considered the norm. In some countries, like I remember my professor told me that, he's my advisor actually at the time, that in India, that people think you're poor if you're skinny. If you have abs, you're poor. Because you're not eating. So, a lot of this is just mass media over the last 50 years showing us, vascularity and high levels of muscle definition. That said, it's pretty cool to do it. I do it. You're going to see me do it again at some point in the next year. I did it last year, I've done it. It's cool. It's fun. Whatever. I hated doing it when I was weak, because there was no reward on the other side of it. I'd get down to sub 160 and not show any abs or any definition up top. And I'd do the math, and I'd be like, well, shit, I'm going to have to weigh like 135 to show visible abs. And that's not what a man's supposed to weigh, Right. And if you think a man's supposed to weigh that, and, whatever, man. That's my opinion. You don't like it, go listen to a different podcast. But a man who's 5'9" is not supposed to weigh 135. That's just simply not a healthy weight for a man. So I'm left with what options, right? I'm like, well, if I really want abs, I get down to 135, or I need to change the lean body mass part of this equation to get that percentage down to heavier body weight, And nowadays, I get made fun of when I get down, because 170 by powerlifting standards is skinny,
Right.
165 is skinny at 5'9". Guys competing in the 165 class are 5'4", 5'3".
Yes. Right.
Guys who are 5'9" are 198 on up, the champions are like 275, Kirk Karwoski, he was like 5'8", 275,
Yeah. Yeah.
So, 5'9", 170, that's a skinny guy, but, I'm not a power lifter, So you guys are sitting there thinking that I'm telling you to go be a power lifter. I'm not a fucking power lifter.
Right.
The reason I drifted towards this style of training was because it was evident to me that the champions in bodybuilding, the IFBB, had a powerlifting background for many decades. I don't know what the situation is now, but Ronnie Coleman had a powerlifting background. Arnold had a powerlifting and Olympic weightlifting background. Franco Colombo had a powerlifting background, and it was pretty common knowledge that these guys would powerlift or do some form of that high-intensity, low-volume training in the off-season, And maybe their volume's higher, they're bodybuilders, than a traditional powerlifter, but the point is they lifted heavy. And then I talked to just bros that I knew that had been, in the weight room since they were teens, and they were big and strong guys, and they were on. And I'm thinking of one guy in particular from Chicago that I'm friends with. I haven't talked to him in a while. I have to drop him a note, but I was talking to him, And, he did martial arts when he was younger. He was thin. He had like more of the, slim, fucking mainstream ab look that, we talk about, the
Right.
Fight Club type of look, but probably like 10 to 15 pounds heavier than Brad Pitt, so he had more muscle density. But, he looked like that. He was, probably 5'5", and he was probably 160, 165 and lean, which is a pretty dense guy. Then, he did some fucking drugs and all that shit and kept lifting. And, now he's probably like 185, 190, at that height. He's a big dude. He likes being that big. I don't know what he weighs now. He's older, but this was when he was in his 30s, now he's in his 40s. And anyhow, I remember asking him like 10 years ago, I'm like, I need to get big, man. I'm like, I'm having trouble building muscle. I keep fucking cutting down and, I end up at 155 pounds and 13% body fat with no muscle definition up top, And he's like, if you want to get big, you got to lift fucking heavy, And I heard that before. My stepbrother told me that. My dad told me that. Like all the big guys I talked to would say you have to lift fucking heavy. And, when he told me that, I'm like, okay, that makes sense. And then I started lifting heavy and my body started changing. The part I didn't understand was I'm not a thick guy, so I'm never going to look like a thick guy. And I'm just going to, grow in relation to where I was, and that's going to continue over time as long as I don't get hurt. So that part's cool, but the recipe was correct. The weight had to get fucking heavy. So I'm not a power lifter. I actually have only competed in 2 or 3 powerlifting meets. I think I've competed in more strength lifting meets.
Right.
I don't enjoy those meets. I like going to them and hanging out and taking lifters to powerlifting meets because the environment is fun. I just don't enjoy being a competitor in that sport. I've not had a fun time in a competition as a lifter. I always have as a coach. It's never a bad experience as a coach.
Sure.
Get to talk to people, get to coach lifters, get to drink sometimes, get to eat hot dogs. It's a lot of camaraderie, but I don't enjoy it as a lifter. So this idea that I'm telling you to power lift, to squat, bench, and deadlift, that's it, that's bullshit. Because I also tell you to chin and press and eventually curl and do other things.
Right.
But my point is, you fuckers with the 135 squat and, the 175 bench, that's not strong enough, man. Look at the guys that you're comparing yourself to. Look at the guys that you seek to look like. They're fucking around in the gym doing bro shit, lifting a lot more weight than you. They're repping out 225, even though they have visible abs and vascularity and all that shit you're chasing. They're repping out 225 benches, Their baseline press is 135, for several reps, right?
Right.
If they were to even deadlift, they would have at least 3 plates on the bar, Like, why is there this correlation with these guys that are muscular that you want to look like, jacked Fight Club, because Fight Club, he was pretty skinny. But you know what? Actually, Brad Pitt benched 275 when he did that movie. Let's be clear on that.
There you go. I didn't know that. Yeah.
I did know that. I remember reading that. So there is a tight correlation between muscularity and strength. That's not an impressive bench by powerlifting standards, but hey, he lifted a lot more than you're lifting. So do you think that when you cut down to 5% body fat and starve yourself to do it, that you're going to, do that at a reasonable body weight? I mean, what was he? Probably $155, but again, he benched 275. That's getting up there. That's the high 200s. That's more than a lot of these guys lift. These skinny fat dudes, and I know some of you are listening, are often struggling to get past 175 for a set of 5 on the bench. I see it all the time. Sometimes 165, 155, 175 seems to be a common number that I've seen in these, smaller guys that, aren't very muscular, but aren't super lean either,
Yeah.
And,
I had something I looked up for this show is because I think he's maybe to your point that Fight Club, I think that's finally starting to shift a little bit. And guys can be a little bit heavier now, right?
Yeah.
Just a little bit. But so to me, Henry...
Well, their girlfriends got pissed off.
Right. So Henry Cavill, I think he's a good kind of bellwether for the modern, attractive male in mass media. So for those of you who don't know him, he played Superman in several movies. He played The Witcher recently.
Yeah, that was a good movie.
So he's done the obligatory shirtless scenes in those movies, superhero movies, basically. When he was training for Superman, I believe this was, 5 or 6 years ago, let's say.
Yeah.
I found some articles about his training regimen, and he started at a deadlift of 300, and he PR'd his deadlift at 435 during his time training for that movie.
How much?
It doesn't say how many reps, but 435. Okay.
He can bench 435.
No, that was a deadlift. It was deadlift.
Oh, okay.
So deadlift 435. Other PRs of note include a 245-pound push press, a 365-pound back squat, and 10 sets of 10 on the front squat with 225. And I have heard him say that he's benched 300 at some point as well. Okay,
I believe it.
So this is a guy, right? He's not an athlete. He's not a power lifter, right? This guy's only job was to look good for this movie. Okay, so for those of you who want to look good, I think he's a good example, right? Other than the fact that, yes, he's genetically elite in the sense that he has the right body and face and everything for movies. But think about that, okay? What is this guy doing? 435 deadlift, 365 squat, front squatting 225 for 10 sets of 10 for a bunch of volume, benching 300. If you can't do that or close to it, then you're barking up the wrong tree. Yeah, you need to work on that first. But those are very achievable numbers for most guys.
As you're saying that, I just did a quick Google on Brad Pitt's bench press because I remember reading this years ago.
Yeah.
And, I could keep looking, but I haven't found the exact article that, cited the 275, but I remember seeing that. They're talking about for Troy in Fight Club, he had to lift to hold on to muscle and run off and he did a lot of cardio to get rid of the fat. There's this crazy fucking workout in here, but as expected, the only thing that the fucker really did with a barbell was bench press, according to this article. And listen up, people. You guys getting stuck at 175, doing set of 5, set of 4, set of 3. I'm talking to you. Brad Pitt, who was probably 155 to 165 when he did that movie. I don't know what he weighed, but it's probably in that range given his height. And he was, 5% body fat probably, and he probably sits at 9% naturally. But all that aside, he was benching your 165 bench that, you got 3 sets of 5 for before you started failing at 170. He did that for 25 reps. 165 for 25, 195 for 15, 225 for 8. So, there's an obvious correlation here between strength and size. And he's not huge, but look at the guy in that movie. He doesn't look like an untrained, flaccid pile of shit. He looks like he's doing something with his muscles, right? We can come up with a fancy word for that. Let me think on it the next few episodes. And maybe we need to come up with a word for that. These little skinny fucking ripped motherfuckers that you look at them, you're like, that guy's, he's one of those skinny motherfuckers that can lift. Like you just know by looking at him. And that's what he looked like in that movie. He didn't look like a flaccid, skinny pile of shit. So I see these numbers. It's no surprise. But guess what, people? They're not that heavy. That is not competitive for powerlifting.
Okay. Henry Cavill. He's 6'1".
Right.
And as much as you can believe this information, his weight is cited at 205 pounds. Okay, so what did I say earlier? I said if you're 6 feet tall, you weigh 170, you need to weigh 200 to 225.
That's right.
Okay, this guy is exactly the mold that I'm talking about, right? So he hit some heavy numbers for an average guy. You don't see people doing that in the gym. Mm-hmm. And I've seen some other articles about him that, by the way, he ate about 5,000 to 6,000 calories a day when he was training to hit those numbers to gain weight. So, I think that that proves I think that kind of proves our point there. I think that's a decent example.
I just pulled up our guy Brad Pitt. He was 172 pounds.
Yep. So so there's our more slender example, right?
Yeah, you have 15-inch biceps.
Yeah,
that's self-reported, but that looks about right. He doesn't have champion bodybuilder biceps, but again, he doesn't look like a scrawny, flaccid pile of shit. So that's the point, people. Like you guys that are 165 to 195, depending on height. We're talking 5'6" to 6 foot. Let's say you're 155 to 165 to 195, and you're 20% body fat. Your problem is not body fat; it's muscle mass. And the guy you're looking at that is about 185 and ripped, he's lifting a lot more fucking weight than you at 185 and ripped. I used to see it in the weight room all the time in college. You have these bros; they were probably on shit too. Some were, some weren't. I have no fucking idea. But the point is, I look at them and they're just repping out weights that I can't even do for a single rep. And they weren't impressive powerlifting weights. But the thing is, because I was weak as piss, I trained like a power lifter. I had to get strong, I had to get
Yeah.
strong. But I never trained like a pure power lifter. I always did presses. I always did chin-ups, did some rows, and then I'm doing curls, But, this idea that heavy lifting equals power lifting, no, you're not going on a platform. You're not going to do a 1RM squat, bench press, and deadlift on a platform. We're not doing that, But
Yeah.
you are limited by strength. Brad Pitt and Henry Cavill probably are not. And they're probably, especially Henry Cavill, he probably had to take some drugs for that,
Yeah.
I don't know that Brad Pitt did. He kind of looks like that all the time, it looks like,
Right.
He's just,
Yeah, that was
got that physique.
That's a great point. If you look at pictures of Henry Cavill just like day to day, so in other words, not in movie mode, not actually shooting, the guy he just looks like a jacked dude, but he's got a smooth stomach. He's got some smoothness around his arms and delt caps, in his chest. But he looks jacked. There's still like muscularity there. You can see like he would look good in a t-shirt. But yeah, he takes his shirt off at the beach and he's not all ripped up.
No.
Like that's pretty realistic. I mean, that's what you're going to see with a lot of guys.
What you have to understand is you are not them. And you're going to have to bust your fucking ass off to get a fraction of what they have at baseline.
Yeah, that's right.
So this is why, to kind of summarize all this, this is why we, you do this long enough and you age like a normal human male, you come to the conclusion that training for looks is a giant waste of fucking time because it doesn't fucking matter that much, But, we got a lot of guys that, started doing this in their 20s, never figured it out. They're still attached to these goals. And, I'm still going to help you do that. I'm not going to criticize you for shit that I did when I was younger. But at the end of the day, you're going to come to that conclusion eventually. You will. If you haven't already, you will.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean go look like a fat, sloppy pile of shit. But, you don't have to be super ripped. Nobody cares. Your girlfriend's going to get pissed at you. You're not supposed to be smaller or leaner than her.
Yeah.
And your legs certainly better not be smaller than hers. I've heard this from many women.
Yeah, right.
And my girlfriend included. She said that,
Yeah.
that I'm lucky my legs are bigger than hers are.
Yeah,
the opposite was unacceptable.
My wife wants me to weigh more than her, be able to pick her up, and I need to look bigger than her. Mm-hmm. And she's a muscular woman. She's got pretty good genetics for building muscle, and she's strong. But yeah, those are criteria.
But at the end of the day, there's so many, now this is just like YouTube common knowledge, but there's so many fucking spoof videos that make fun of this. You train for looks and get into bodybuilding shit over a long enough timeline, you're really just competing with other dudes.
Yeah, it's true.
Plain and simple.
It's a sausage party.
It's essentially, yeah. It's no longer about the opposite sex, who we haven't really given much credence to on this. The reason we haven't really dove into women and bulking is because a lot of women don't need to do it. Some of you do. My girlfriend was one of them. She had to gain 20 pounds, and she looks great. Her didn't have to buy new clothes. Got stronger. She was so under-muscled. So for you women listening, she was 98 pounds at one point in her PhD program. That's the earliest DEXA we have of her pre-weightlifting, pre-marathon running too. She was 98 pounds at 28% body fat. That is an under-muscled woman. She never thought she was fat. She always perceived herself as being too damn skinny.
Yeah.
She graduated high school at 90 pounds, but low muscle mass. Then she ran marathons, and she says her calves grew just from running because she was so under-muscled,
Right.
And she was about 106 when I met her. And then, she trained, gained 15, 20 pounds. Her abs got more defined, from doing that. And then over the years, she's oscillated between 115 and 125, And 125 has been a more recent thing because she's been training for 8 years or 7 years now. She's been training for 7 years now. So her top has went up, her bottom has went up, in terms of top end of her weight range, bottom end of her weight range. She'll never be 106 again, most likely, unless she really wants to starve her ass off for one of these contests she does. But my point is, a lot of the time, the skinny, fat female doesn't need to gain a bunch of weight. Doesn't need to lose a bunch of weight unless she wants to. I've helped many women lose a bunch of weight that wanted to be leaner, and I've noticed that women aren't as sensitive to the calorie restriction as men are. And Rip's written about this in the Dre book as well. I can train a woman on low calories and keep a lot more performance than a man, and I think it's just because the way fat's distributed and the way the leverage changes.
Yeah.
The traditional male fat storage patterns in the midsection, apple shape, right? The traditional or typical, stereotypical, whatever word you want to use, the general female fat storage patterns in the hips and thighs. So you're not going to get much leverage by growing a bigger ass and bigger thighs, but you get a lot of leverage by getting a big gut,
Yes, yeah, especially in the squat and deadlift
Exactly, and the bench press. So,
and the bench press. Yeah,
I've seen women that are 185 and women that are 115, pressing and bench pressing the same weight, because
Yeah.
both of them have visible abs,
that's right. And you see a lot more women that with the muscular distribution between their top and their bottom is different too, right? You see
Exactly.
a woman who's 185 that can deadlift a whole lot that still has a small upper body. Their shoulders are small.
Yeah.
And I mean like their skeletal frame as well as their muscular distribution.
Yeah.
So that's pretty common.
So-
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's why there's not a whole lot to talk about there. That's a different episode. That's more of a different topic when it comes to women and
Yes.
weight fluctuations. You're dealing with different issues typically, although this issue does come up a fraction of the time. It's just not the most common issue. So
Yeah.
we're not trying to leave you out,
Yeah,
but
physiologically, everything we're saying is still true for a female, right? It's just the degree to which the changes will take place is different, right? Everything's just on
Yeah.
a smaller scale.
yeah, you're going to gain less total muscle. It's going to happen slower.
Right.
You're not going to lift as much total weight. You're not going to lift as much weight in relation to body weight. That's generally not going to happen. So everything's a little bit different, but the process is the same. You're not going to have to eat as many calories to get
Right.
to get the needle moving. But we'll do an episode on this. It's gonna sound a little different because the challenges, the goals, the motivations that we run into with female lifters tend to be different. It's,
Right.
because we are different.
Well, and I will say this. This is my experience. When we're talking about doing this for, like you mentioned that you eventually will come off of the idea of that you're doing all this purely for aesthetic reasons, and that you'll do it for reasons of like you enjoy training, you enjoy being very functional because you're strong and you have muscles.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's very true. I think there's another way to frame it, which is this. If you go through this process, let's say that you are, like all you really care about is like, I really just want to look better. Okay, if you commit yourself to this process and you get strong and you put on muscle and you're 4 or 5 years into this process and the goals have shifted and you just don't care about the aesthetic goals you used to have. Well, guess what? You've given yourself a tremendous athletic platform that you get to use for the rest of your life. You've given yourself strength that's going to make everything in your life easier. If you pick up a hobby, an outdoor hobby, whatever it is, kayaking, playing soccer, throwing the baseball, whatever it is, you're going to be better at all of those things because you put all that effort into getting strong. If you get into something else, maybe you go further down the aesthetic, maybe you start lifting, just want to look better. And then you're like, man, you get into bodybuilding, let's say. Well, guess what? You've given yourself a great platform to get into bodybuilding. You've taught yourself the basic skills of lifting the barbell. If you learn how to squat, bench, press, and deadlift, then you're going to be good at doing all of those bodybuilding movements, right? We've talked about that before. They're foundational in a lot of different ways.
Mm-hmm.
And the same thing is true for women too. If you want to be like maybe in your 20s, you just care about like looking good at the beach. That's cool. But maybe you get to be in your mid 30s and now you're a mom and you've got little kids. Well, guess what? If you're strong, then you can handle those long days of picking up babies and toddlers and managing kids all day and managing their stuff and then cooking and, cleaning around the house and working a job, right? That's the life of a mother is surprisingly physical for those that aren't familiar with it.
Absolutely.
You're going all day and, you hold a little 20-pound baby. It's not much, but then you do it for, 12 hours a day and it becomes a lot. So guess what? If you have a good squat and deadlift, you're going to be much more resilient. And I see that a lot in women. I call them young women, but they're women who are in their 30s and their lack of physical practice and lack of strength and muscle mass really starts to wear them down. They're just not
Right.
ready for the physical demands of motherhood. And, but if you're in your 20s and you're just like, okay, you do this process and you get strong and you lift weights, well, you've given yourself that foundation that you get to use for the rest of your life, even if your goals change. in what you want out of
That's
life
right.
changes.
That's
So,
right.
so I think there's a lot of value here, and there are a lot of different ways we can frame it, but it all comes back to me. This has been my experience with a lot of different people, is that what we're talking about here is very foundational, whatever your goals are. And it's never something, I don't think it's ever something you would regret doing.
Right.
Right. You might regret doing a gymnastics program in your mid-30s.
Yeah.
I don't think you're going to regret getting your squat, bench, and deadlift up, even if you don't care about driving them up 10 years from now.
No, you're not. And, I can't say it enough. These guys that, are bodybuilders, naturally jacked actors, etc., they don't have to do this. They want to do this because they want to, be as big as possible, be as ripped as possible, whatever, right? Or they have a movie they're getting paid a lot of money for.
Yeah.
You, on the other hand, you're starting out at a much lower baseline than they are. You have to get strong. They don't have to train to get strong. They're strong out the gate.
Right.
So remember that. They are strong out the gate. These guys and gals too,
Yep.
these people that look like they train, look muscular, whatever word you want to use, they were strong out the gate. They were lifting more than you are after a year on their first day. So let that sink in for a second. And if you think that doesn't matter, you're in la-la land. These professional researchers and bodybuilding gurus are out of touch with reality. They haven't went through the process. They went in strong, or they're creating artificial conditions for very short periods of time that aren't typically sustainable. Guys like us, on the other hand, we've put the years in. We've learned from other people. In my case, I have not fucked with drugs. Trent, you have not fucked with drugs, correct?
Nope.
So, there's a lot more to be learned there. The longer you stay off them, the more things you have to troubleshoot. Mm-hmm. And then, if somebody's doing that stuff, there's things to troubleshoot there. I'm sure that's not what I do, though. That's not what I do. And what I will tell you is this. A, you have to really enjoy this because you're going to be doing it for a long time, and you may just get a mediocre result out of it. So you have to enjoy it, because if I wanted like the absolute best result ever, I would have quit a long time ago. It'd be pointless, or I would have had to get on drugs,
Right.
But I enjoy doing it. So that's number one. You have to have a tremendous amount of motivation to keep doing this. And, also too, I've improved, Sure, I'm not a champion bodybuilder. I'm not as jacked as a Hollywood actor, although my friend who works in the film business said that with cameras and shit, I probably look just as jacked as these guys when I'm lighter, when I'm on my low end.
Sure.
But so that's another thing we didn't talk about, but we don't need to, it speaks for itself. But, my point is, we've went through the work. We've troubleshooted shit. We've done all the stupid things that you've tried to do. And I'm telling you right now, you really got to like doing this, because if you could just put all that size on and get all those gains and be super ripped, and do it in a short amount of time without drugs, you would have done it by now, because it just accidentally happens for these people. If it's not accidentally happening for you, then, you might want to, heed to a few words of advice here. You need to get stronger. If you're fucking around with, piddly weights that these guys are warming up with, then that should tell you something, because there's clearly a tight correlation between strength and the appearance of your muscles. They may not appear the way you'd like them to appear. I'd like to appear to be 6'2". That's not going to fucking happen,
Right.
If you'd like to have a long bicep from your shoulder to your elbow and you don't already have it, you weren't born with it, that's not going to happen, right? So set your expectations, look at yourself, be like, okay, this is what I look like. If I live for 5 years, am I still going to look like this? No, but you'll look like a better version of that, but you're not going to completely change something that's not already there. You're not going to add inches to your height. You're not going to make your biceps longer. You're not going to make your skin tighter, or more or you're not going to make your skin tighter,
Yeah. You're going to look better. The thing is, like, if you just
everybody looks better when they train.
If you look at other people that not yourself, and you look at other people that go through this, you're like, wow, the guy looks better. Wow, she looks so much better. Like, it's like you can see the improvements in other people, but we're blind to the improvements in ourselves.
Yeah.
So
just know you're going to look better if you keep doing this over the long haul.
Yeah.
And if you don't enjoy doing it, then you're setting yourself up for failure. You got to like it. You really got to like this shit.
Right. Yeah. And there's lots of ways to do that. There's lots of ways to do that.
Yeah, it's like Rip told me about opening gyms. You better really like this business because you don't make a lot of money, and you might be able to, if you do things right and sensibly, you might be able to afford a few beers at the end. And that sunk in. I thought about that when he said that. It's the same thing here. You better really like training because what you're probably going to get out of this, is you're going to train for a very long time, and you're going to improve, but you're not going to have like a 200% improvement. No. You're going to look a little more jacked than you did in the beginning, and you're going to be very rewarded by it. It's going to be visible to yourself and others, but you're not going to go and be Mr. Olympia just from fucking lifting weights if that's not already happening for you.
Yeah. It's true. It's true.
So enjoy it.
So there you go. This wasn't really a show about bulking, but it was a show about physique. It's a show about what you need to get there. Mm-hmm. There you go. Hope that's helpful.
I hope so too, because I wanted to take a different spin on it because, lately if you tell anybody they need to gain fat, it's like taboo. Everybody tries to pretend we're not telling you to gain fat. No, we're telling you to gain fat and muscle and strength. And we could go into what that diet looks like. We'll do a part 2 of this episode. I think it does.
Let's do a part 2 where we talk about, about that, right?
Let's go into what it looks like. I think we've just introduced the topic today. We're going to talk about what that looks like. So next time we'll talk about the training and the diet surrounding that. But I really just wanted to hammer home that, yes, I'm telling you to gain body fat. And I'm not apologizing for that. I'm not telling you to become a fat, sloppy mess. I'm not telling you to become a fat, unhealthy, sloppy mess. If you have a chronic disease that can be worsened by gaining a bunch of weight or eating a bunch of food, I'm also not telling you to do this. This is for the general healthy population, that's under 50.
Yep.
Probably more like under 40. You can do this and you're going to be fine. You're going to be fine. I don't want you to get obese. I don't want you to have trouble walking. I want you to be able to walk your dog, play with your kids, all that shit. That's not what I'm saying, but you're going to gain body fat. You're not going to be defined. Plain and simple. And that's what the other people don't want to tell you. They're going to say, we want to skew it towards muscle, or you want to gain mostly muscle. You want to minimize fat. You're not going to do that. It doesn't work that way. Maybe theoretically it works that way, and you can write a nice paper for a journal that sounds like that. But when the mean body weight of the participants is 75 kilos or less, what does that tell you about the sample? Again, another topic. I could go on and on about this. So I'm just going to close out here by saying, look, guys, you're going to gain fat when you're gaining muscle, and it's going to be probably more than you want to gain. It's not going to be a little itty-bitty amount of fat. It's going to be noticeable, okay?
Yep.
But you're not going to be a sloppy mess. So that said, thank you for tuning into the Weights and Plates podcast. You can find me at weightsandplates.com or on Instagram at _Robert_Santana. You can visit the gym here in Phoenix, Weights and Plates Gym. We're about 5 to 10 minutes south of Sky Harbor Airport near South Mountain. And we have an Instagram page, weights on _plates, which I desperately need to update, but I plan on doing that. So, yeah.
Very good. You know where to find me. On Instagram at marmalade_cream. And if you have any coaching questions or you're interested in online coaching, email me, jonesbarbellclub@gmail.com. All right, we'll talk to you again in a couple weeks.